Everybody's doing well today. It's 8:30 and time for us to begin our business. Let's see. This is my first meeting with you.
Yes,
Misha?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Would
Good
you
morning.
get us started with roll call, please?
Laura Bellum,
Present.
Mark Gardner,
Here.
David Holly,
Here.
Landon Moore, Mark Munson,
Present.
David Harrington, Herman Covey.
Here.
Did I miss anybody? David.
Oh, you have to do. You have to do. You have to. Do
Just you two? Cheryl Spivey.
Here.
Elizabeth Gooden.
Present.
I don't have to do you guys.
Yes, we do.
Solomon Ashby.
Here.
Derek Challenger.
Here.
Shannon Glover. Anybody over there?
No. Those are visitors.
I didn't know you. No. I believe we have a quorum. And welcome. Misha sent the minutes out last week. And if there are any corrections or updates we need to make, does anyone have anything? If you've already reviewed them and you're ready to accept them, I'd like a motion, please.
Move to accept the minutes as presented. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. All right. Misha, would you bring us up to date on applications?
Miss Gooden's
I'm
going to
going to do that for a first time.
All right.
As you'll see from the sheet we provided you, we had one retirement. We had Michael Wright, who's a police lieutenant. You can see the numbers there on the sheet. Reported deaths, we had Earl C. Andrews, a fire and police retiree.
All right.
And I'm sorry, also lastly, you'll see the active participants as of March 1st. Active participants in the fire and police retirement system is 18. Active retirement members in the Portsmouth Supplemental Retirement System is 15.
All right. Who's going to be doing the historic funds?
So the statements are on the following page, and I will just run through the changes since last month. We had a beginning balance of $190,448,000. We had some you look to the bottom line. I think this is the most important number. For the month of January, we actually had unrealized gain of almost $11.8 million. And then you can see the employer contributions and the payments out in January that brought us to an ending balance of $204.9 million for the month of January.
Did that 11 million unrealized gain, did that pretty much make up for what we lost last quarter?
It hasn't quite, but it's gone a long ways.
Okay.
Year to date now is 4.5 million under. So 4.5 million loss, but but
Okay.
we picked
All
up some good strides in January.
Thank you, Ms. Spivey. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, the open bus update.
You can see the
How do you pronounce it? OPEB?
OPEB, yes.
Okay.
Other post-employment benefits, but we refer to it as OPEB.
Okay.
Looking at the statements, so this page 2 of the account statement, you can see that the market value at the end of January was $3,002,000, and that gets.
Ms. Spivey, where are you?
Oh, okay. The pages are numbered. So, I'm going to let's start at the letterhead that says VML VACO.
Okay.
And then go into, actually, this is the memo. I wasn't going to go over the memo. But we go into this, where we get to the account statement.
Okay.
And then the page 2, the one that's labeled page 2 of the account statement.
Comerica, page 2.
Right.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry. We have the market value at the end of January is $3,002,499. So basically, that guy. This month we're back to the money that was transferred into the trust fund. So it's earned enough money to pay the cost, the administrative cost of the fund. Of course, this deposit, this $3 million deposit was made last April. We'll make another one probably the same time this year, if not in May. But very, very soon we will be. But this year it's $1 million. So the city started out with a $3 million deposit, and for fiscal 19 budgeted $1 million, and we'll be making that deposit soon. Any questions?
All right, thank you. Moving right along. On the new business. Is Mr. Adams here? Yes, there he is. Good morning.
Okay. I was asked to come and just do a quick overview of the steps necessary once the contract for John Hancock expired. The contract was signed on December 1st, 2015, and it's a 5-year contract, which means the termination will be on or before December 1st or November 30th, 2020. Once the contract has expired, it's a 5-year term with no renewals on it, so once the contract's over with, we'd have to go out and do an RFP again to get another company in. It'll be the same process we did for the selection of the advisor, by which we'll put the RFP out. A panel will be convened, consisting of employees of the city and members of the board, and we'll go through our evaluation process to select a new company.
How far in advance do you start the RFP?
This one will be the last time we did this. We started a year out because it took a while to go through this. So we started. It's probably best to start around the 1st of January 2020. Oh,
No.
the end of this year.
Oh, it expires 2020.
It expires December 1st, 2020. So we need to start January of 2020. The first of the year.
Okay.
Mike, was that a 5-year contract, or was it 3-year with 1-year renewals? Because they seemed to, the last meeting, I think they were under the understanding that the contract had expired.
No, it was a straight 5-year term.
Okay.
We've done it in 5-year increments with no renewals. So every 5 years, you have the opportunity to think about whether or not you want to go for or stay with term. No, it's a 5-year term contract.
Okay.
Now, is that by law? I mean, could we not build in a renewal if we're particularly happy with the group that's handling it, or by law do we have to go every 5 years?
This one does not have any renewal terms in it at all, so by law, you have to go back out and rebid. Some of our contracts.
Each contract, right?
I'm sorry?
At the end of each contract.
At the end of this contract term, yes, sir. You have to go back and because there was no renewal clauses in this one. Sometimes there is a renewal clause, which means you can exercise the right to go on again for, say, another 5 years. This one has no extension terms and no renewal terms. It was a straight 5-year contract with no renewals.
Was that the city's choice, or was that what they submitted to us?
It was the board at that time. It was their choice.
I see.
Madam Chair and members of the commission, the city does have an ordinance that puts a 5-year limit on term. Public procurement, at one point in time, that was the maximum, although you could have renewals. But again, because of the nature of it, the process being public in nature, the philosophy, of course, is that periodically you take whatever service or good contract back out to the public to see what your service needs are. So in this particular instance, it sounds as if you all decided at that time for a straight 5-year renewal. But as Mr. Gardner knows, sometimes when we do 5-year renewals, it's 3 years and 2 1-year extension options, renewal periods. But this particular one seems to have been a straight 5. There have been very rare occasions where the city has set forth a 5-year term and then renewed to any level beyond that, because it gets part of that is supposed to be public competition. While we may be fine with who we have, but again, part of that is testing the market and to make sure that the public is engaged and involved, and you're not creating some sort of relationship that ultimately is not for the benefit of the public.
Just for my own information, Solomon, when we pick somebody, does the committee make the recommendation to pick based on what we feel is the best, or based on the least expensive fees that we're being charged?
Typically, we don't necessarily have a low bid, and these services will end up being more professional, so you won't really have, there's a professional element in terms of the services and a fee related to it. So no, the short answer is you're not restricted to taking the lowest fee.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, I'm sure we'll see you again in December to talk about January.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Mr. Challenger.
I like these kind of things.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Derek Challenger, Assistant City Attorney for the City of Portsmouth. I'm going to be doing a retirement board presentation. The first thing I want to talk about is plan documents. The plan document is state statutes or local ordinances establishing the defined benefit plan. First of all, the first piece of business is what is a defined benefit plan. That is an employer-sponsored retirement plan in which an employee's pension payments are calculated according to length of service and the salary they earned at the time of retirement. That's the first piece of it. The plan document generally covers the benefits offered by the plan, how the plan is funded, how the plan is governed, and how the assets are managed. Here, the main plan document for the city is in the city code. So if you ever wanted to look at the actual, how the benefits are offered, how the plan is funded, how it's governed, it's all in the Portsmouth City Code under a section called retirement. There are 4 fiduciary duties: duty of loyalty, duty of prudence, duty to follow trust provisions, and duty of impartiality. And there's really 2 main duties, and they encompass these 4: the duty of loyalty and the duty of care. Those are the 2 main duties that you have as a fiduciary. The other thing that comes up as a result of that is the fact that this right here governs what your obligations are in terms of the trust itself as it relates to the plan itself, that you have a responsibility to be loyal to the plan, to use the type of diligence that's required to make investment, to make choices such as what we talked about earlier in terms of selection of advisors. That's an important decision. To follow the trust provisions, that is, if you have a document, you have to follow it. You can't deviate from what the actual plan requires. So as it relates to benefits, as it relates to how it's funded, you have to follow the plan that we have. So the first duty is the duty of care. That's to act with the care, skill, prudence, and diligence under the circumstances, then prevailing that a prudent person acting in a like capacity and familiar with those matters would use in the conduct of enterprise of like character and with like aims. When you see the word prudent person, a lot of the cases that analyze this have used the term prudent investor. So we're not being judged by a prudent person, really. It's really a prudent investor, because that's the standard in which you will be judged. That, for instance, when you select a investment policy, that you are supposed to be acting as a prudent investor would when it comes to asset allocation. The duty of impartiality. That's the duty of loyalty owed to all members and beneficiaries. Fiduciary must be impartial among different interests, retirees and active participants. This comes up often with COLA. Because, for instance, whenever you're saying we're going to do a increase to take in consideration inflation, you're obviously making a decision about increasing the benefits currently to people who are receiving it. But that is directly a sort of a conflict with respect to active participants, because you're using more money now that may not be available later on. So that's not that you can't do it, but that is the thing you're trying to be conscious of, that you have a duty to all the members. So obviously it's easier to make that decision depending upon the funding status of the fund. If you're at 100%, it's a non-issue. If you're at a 50%, then that is an issue you got to be concerned about. Are you rewarding retirees at the expense of active participants? And that same example is relevant to younger and older members, because obviously with the COLA, for instance, younger members could be disadvantaged compared to older members. And then the other considerations like long-term and short-term members. The next duty is duty of loyalty. A fiduciary must not harm the interests of retirement system members and beneficiaries by doing any of the following: self-dealing, acting in the interest of a third party, and favoring one group of members or beneficiaries over another. Obviously, self-dealing means doing something that is going to benefit you individually, or individually meaning as the board, or even for that matter as it relates to the city, as opposed to being more concerned about the benefit to the fund. And obviously it's not a problem if, for instance, the city and the fund both benefit equally. That's not an issue. It's only when you start saying we're more concerned about the benefit for a third party than we are to the fund. It's not a concern about ancillary benefits. So that's the duty of loyalty.
Is that why we sign the annual statements? Disclosure or non-disclosure?
Yes, that is part of it.
Okay.
There is a whole section that deals with conflict of interest as it relates to city government, state government, and nationally. So that is a component of it as it relates to that. So the reality of it is, for instance, if someone comes forward and says, hey, my wife is employed at one of the advisors that we have, that's something that needs to be disclosed to us to let us know, hey, either A, you may not be able to vote on a particular matter that is what you're dealing with conflicts with the fund, or it may mean that it has to be disclosed to everybody. There's different things that have to happen, but the first thing that happens is letting us know that it exists in the first place. The role of the pension actuary, and this is kind of an interesting slide, because when I created the slide, I didn't realize that Andre Stewart would be coming to advise the city council at the public works session on Tuesday. So I would add that in addition to what I have to say, it wouldn't be a bad idea to look at the video of his presentation. An actuary job is to determine how much money will be needed years from now. How much should we be setting aside each month, year? How well we are managing financial risks, such as measuring life expectancy data and assumptions made in pension governance, such as annual rates of return assumptions. He spent a lot of time talking about those issues, and the one that I want to focus mostly on is, like, for instance, the annual rate of return assumptions. Obviously, in the investment policy, and what governs us is we have a 7.25 rate of return assumption that we're making. Obviously, we have an obligation as a board to make sure that that's a good assumption to make in the first place. The second piece of it is the life expectancy assumption that's made. We use the 2018 IRS static life expectancy data. And that is important because obviously you're trying to project how long people are going to live to see whether or not you don't have enough money to pay them benefits. So consequently, those assumptions have a big role to play as to what our liabilities and what our assets are as relates to the fund. And the actuary's job is to help us see how much money are we going to need 18 years from now. How much money do we need to set aside each month? Because there's only two ways in which the fund increases in value in terms of an asset. Either increased contributions, that's one. Two, the actual value of the asset by virtue of the market. So consequently, if you have X amount of money that's invested, if you have a down period, obviously your assets is going to go down. And if you have an increased amount of people who are claiming benefits, that's also going to have a big role to play in how much money you're going to have available to go forward. So that's what the pension actuary does. The primary sources governing Portsmouth retirement system is the Portsmouth City Code, which is Chapter 30. The bylaws. Recently, we made a revision to the bylaws as it relates to notice and what the codifying into existence what we do in terms of tracking down beneficiaries or members who we haven't been able to get in contact, or they contact us, and what is our obligation to, and how do we go about searching for people who have an entitlement to benefits, and we codify that into the bylaws. But that should be not a static document, but a document that we continue to use best practices to determine what is the best practice to do, because that's part of our governance policy is the bylaws. The investment policy we also recently have updated. Virginia Code also has sections on there that deal with local retirement systems.
Hey, Derek?
Yes.
Back to that previous slide, is there any, in the code, is there any requirement as far as how often the actuary number should be reviewed as far as death and projecting out?
Yes. Yes, there is. And actually, there'll be a slide coming up
Okay, all right,
that's going to talk about that.
thank you.
When I first became involved with the retirement board, I had a hard time keeping up with who were the various advisors that we had and exactly what roles they play. The board had retained Greystone Consultant to administer and manage the funds of the retirement system. Greystone Consultant is responsible for assembling individual fund managers and funds that make up the funds of the retirement systems in conjunction with the parameters of the investment policy. So you have Greystone, but then you have all of the various other asset managers who govern the actual funds that make up the actual entire balance or entire fund. And then you have John Hancock Retirement Plan Services, which Andre Stewart is an actuary in their company to provide administrative, actuarial, and compliance function, trustee and retiree administration services, and engagement and education services. So those are the two main advisors that we have. Pension fund fiduciary. Under ERISA, a person is a fiduciary concerning retirement plan if it utilizes discretion respecting management or use of its assets, provide investment advice for a fee such as Greystone, or has any discretionary authority in administration of plan. First of all, ERISA. ERISA is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. It is a federal U.S. tax and labor law that established minimum standards for pension plans in private industry. Private industry. We are not governed by ERISA, but it is best practice to follow ERISA. The other thing that's in there with respect to that is a fiduciary. When you think of fiduciary, think trust. You are entrusted with these funds. So it's not how you would individually do something. It's going back to what we talked about before, the prudent investor. So whenever you're doing any of these type of things, you are a fiduciary. You utilize discretion regarding management or use of its assets, provide investment advice. So in other words, there are multiple fiduciaries involved. The board is the fiduciary. The advisors that we use can be a fiduciary. The fiduciary responsibilities are fund management, and by fund management, it's the management of fund assets. It describes people and institutions that manage investments on behalf of investors. The second thing, communication and education of the board itself, as well as communication with members and beneficiaries. For instance, John Hancock is a big person in terms of the board that provides information to members. And that's one of their responsibilities. The other thing is we have a responsibility with respect to education, which is the reason why there is a requirement that John Hancock provides fiduciary training, because there's an obligation for education both internally as well as to the members itself. Investment-related activities. This is the reason why we have an investment committee.
Can I ask a question? So just so I'm clear, Greystone is primarily responsible for investing the funds.
Yes.
And John Hancock is primarily responsible for the administrative services.
Correct. For administrative services as well as actuarial services.
Right, but they're not investing any funds.
No, you're correct.
All right.
And then the choice of consultants, advisors. We've already had, very recently, we did an RFP as it relates to investment advisors. And then now, as we just heard earlier, we'll be doing another RFP as it relates to the John Hancock contract expiring.
Right.
So that's another fiduciary responsibility. The administration of benefits. is to ensure that retirement system benefits are adequately funded. When you think about all of these different things, the main thing to remember, the main purpose of this whole process is to provide a mechanism to ensure that retirees get the benefit they're entitled to. So sometimes we can get caught up in all of the minutia of all of these different things going on, but remember that's the real goal. The funded status is determined by the ratio of the system's assets to its liabilities. So that's the way you can always be able to get the number, is just a ratio. And so obviously if the assets increase as it relates to liabilities, your funding status increase. If the liabilities increase relative to the assets, they're going to go down. According to the American Academy of Actuaries, the plan should have as part of its investment policy a strategy in place to attain and maintain a funded status of 100% or greater. That's kind of an aspirational type of thing. Because I haven't seen very many 100% funded status plans. As it relates to the Portsmouth Retirement Fund, this is some generalities. Obviously, there aren't any exceptions. Generally, you have to reach the age of 50 at a minimum and earn the number of years of credible service, which is generally 5. Upon your notification of intent to retire. That's Portsmouth City Code 30-116. Obviously, there are all provisions that deal with disability, retirement, so forth and so on, but this is the general baseline. The annual retirement allowance is payable monthly for life. It's calculated at 2% of the average final compensation, which is the 36 highest consecutive months of income, multiplied by the number of years of credible service. And if you listen to the presentation gave by Andre Stewart, he even had a chart up there that talked about how for a certain number of years it's 3%, a certain number of years it's 2%. It changes based off of how many years of service, with the highest percentage being at the beginning terms of, I think it's up to the first 20 years, 25 years is our higher level. Another obligation of the board is the monitoring of investments. The U.S. Supreme Court noted that the fiduciary responsibility of trustees concerning investments includes a continuing duty to monitor trust investments and remove bad investments. This duty is in addition to the duty to exercise care and selection of investments at the beginning. So obviously, every time we look at the fund on a quarterly basis, it's not just to be looking at the numbers for the purpose of looking at it. It's to look to see whether or not at some period of time, whether or not it's something that needs to be removed from the portfolio. Right. And that's the reason why the benchmark is included, so that you're not looking at it in a vacuum. So if you look at a particular investment, you look at the benchmark, and there's a big disparity between the two over a period of time, that's when your duty to monitor trust investments comes in. We're not talking about a bad quarter. I mean, because nobody's perfect. But if you see it over a period of time and if the benchmark is not being met, there's a duty to monitor that.
Hey, Derek, who is ultimately responsible as far as fiduciary responsibilities? Is it this board or is it Greystone because we have contracted them to invest the portfolio?
Both of us. And the reason why that's the case is the board always maintains, as the trustee, responsibility. Yes, we have provided them discretionary so they can do it, but we still have an obligation to monitor them.
Right.
So although we have delegated responsibility, the board still retains ultimate responsibility. The breach of a fiduciary duty In order to have a breach of a fiduciary duty, you have to have the existence of a fiduciary relationship. And obviously, for instance, the board has that. The question becomes whether some ancillary provider has a fiduciary duty. Then you have to have a breach of a duty. Then you have to have causation, which means it caused it. There's the proximate cause of whatever you're talking about, which is generally damages. So this generally comes up when, I'm using an example. If you have significant losses economically in terms of a fund, then obviously it's the possibility someone could say, there's a breach of fiduciary duty as it relates to the investment losses. So in order to even get that type of dichotomy, you have to say there's an existence of a fiduciary relationship, there's a breach of the duty. It could be because of self-dealing, for instance, or some type of conflict of interest or whatever, and it caused economic damages like the loss into a fund. And a breach of fiduciary duty can be filed against individual trustees as well as the board. So that's the reason why, even if you delegate it to Greystone in this situation, we still have a continuing obligation to monitor it.
Here's a question.
Excuse me there. Based on what you just indicated, are there any protections for board members as it relates to what you just explained about exposure to damages should there be a breach in the fiduciary responsibilities?
There are. First of all, there's a term called indemnification. That's relevant. There's a duty to defend, which is also relevant. So yes, there are protections for that situation, and that comes up more frequently because it's more high profile and with respect to the city council. But it's the same thing. The boards are treated the same way as, for instance, the city council is. But you see it come up more prevalently as it relates to the city council. But yes, indemnification comes up, defense of any type of litigation, that comes up. But yes, those protections are there.
Okay.
The next section is retiree requests and appeals. Board may in closed session hear specific cases regarding retiree requests and pension benefits. Retiree must submit the request to the executive secretary to be placed on the agenda. An applicant for retirement benefits may produce documents such as W-2 form, tax returns, and Social Security documentation. This was added to the bylaws, I believe, maybe a year ago.
Yes.
And this particular entry or aspect of the bylaws will come up later on today. So that's a very important slide, and we've used this several times since I've been dealing with the board. Actuary studies. Board is required to have an annual actuary report performed to determine funding status and contributions needed. And the reason why that's the case is funding status and contribution. The city, which if you look at the presentation by Andre Stewart, it's really advising the city council of what type of contributions are required and necessary based partly on the fund performance. So that's the reason why it has to be done, because obviously the actuary report, as he talked about in his presentation, is not static. And he used the example of a mortgage and how it's not like a mortgage, because for a mortgage you have a fixed payment that you know what it's going to be. With a actuary report, the actual amount changes because the actual liabilities and assets continuously change. So that's the reason why it's a much more frequently than that. So, and it's not only the actual report, but it's actually even more involved than that, because periodically we have to reach out to the actuary depending upon other questions that come up that impact the funding status. So we actually use the actuary quite a bit when it comes to being able to really advise about the actual funding status of the retirement fund.
Eric, do we as a board make an annual recommendation to City Council as far as what we feel the funding should be on an annual basis to hit the numbers that we need to get to?
The ordinance says that is your obligation. It is historically just happens automatic. It ends up running through the finance department more often than not. When you all get the information, immediately the finance department takes that information in and builds it in and forwards it on to the city manager. But by ordinance, that ADM is supposed to be delivered from the retirement board to the city so that they know what the calculation is. But of course, because that's so routine in terms of the information that comes through here, I don't know if the board actually say adopting a report and say send it on to the city manager. It's become a bit automatic in the process.
So finance takes what information that we see,
right,
and based on the numbers that the city has available, determines they can make X number of dollars per year contribution to the retirement.
Correct. It is not the city determining. The actuary determines what that number is, and so the city doesn't have a.
Well, the city knows how much taxes are coming in.
Correct.
Cash flow.
But the number is set apart from the city's situation, if I'm correct. I don't want to lean too far.
Okay. You want me to
Yes,
fill in?
please.
Okay. Yes. On an annual basis, so of course we're this time of the year, the finance department is assisting the city manager with her budget, and we're using information from last year. You know, to give you good examples. The last year, this time, the actuary gave us a figure of a 3% increase, and that's what we use. So we took the information that was provided the fall before, and increased it by 3%. That increase ended up when the reporting was done this fall. The report you received for fiscal year ended June 30 of 18, the increase was actually 13%. So we're putting together an amendment to the budget to request City Council to increase the contribution so that we will so that the city will be funding the full ADC. So now we're in preparing for this year's the 2020 budget, and that increase is much more in line with the actual increase this year, and Mr. Stewart in his presentation gave those figures, which brings us over a 2-year period of increasing the annual amount about $2 million, and a year. And so of course the city's revenues are not growing at that level. So right now the city's making an $11 million debt service, plus possibly needing to budget an additional $10 million plus, to fund the closed pension systems, so one of the reasons we're having these conversations is exactly what you said. The city has to balance that with the revenues that are coming in, And so it's a difficult process. But up to this point, the city, since the pension obligations were issued, the city has been funding the full ADC every year.
Okay, thank you.
What is the time frame for the study to can be completed every year? Is that something that's normally done well in advance of the end of the year so you can have that information prepared for the budget?
It's actually done after the end of the fiscal year, because it takes into consideration all of the factors that happen during the fiscal year. And so the actuary, who's actually Mr. Stewart, who was here this week, uses that information, and it gets reported to this board in the October time frame. But what he's reporting, again, is reporting backwards. He's reporting of what it was at June 30, which is why, at this time of the year, not only are we building a budget for the next year, we're also seeing if there needs to be a catch-up amount that needs to be funded, and that's where we are right now.
I'm glad we had that discussion because I had something that I wanted to share that it wasn't on my slides, but this discussion brought it up. Our board has two ex officio members. The Human Resource Director and the Finance Director are both ex officio members. And the reason why that's the case, or the reason why I believe it's the case, is because Human Resources and Finance both are involved tremendously as it relates to the board, as it relates to the benefits component of it, as it relates to the investment actuary aspect of it, the OPEB aspect of it. So I think it was kind of interesting that that is the reason why, in my opinion, that there are the two ex officio members are HR and Finance, and ex officio means you're a member based off of your position, and it's often a non-voting classification. So with the last thing with respect to the actuary studies is what is an actual actuary report in the first place? It's a type of appraisal of a pension fund's assets versus liabilities using investment, economic, and demographic assumptions for the model to determine the funded status of a pension plan. Of all those words, the one I want you to pay the most attention to is assumptions. The biggest aspect of a lot of the actuary reports are the assumptions that are made, because it's only true as the assumptions are true. The OPEB funds, it's only been maybe a year, roughly, that this board has also been the trustees of the OPEB funds, and it was established pursuant to Section 15.2, 1544 of the Virginia Code for the purpose of accumulating and investing assets to fund other post-employment benefits. For instance, health care premiums that a retired employee receives. It does not include pension benefits. So I also would like to refer you to Tuesday's public works session with Ms. Gooden gave a presentation on the OPEB trust fund. So if there's any questions as it relates to OPEB funds, Ms. Gooden would be the expert on that one.
Let me clarify. My financial sister here takes care of the money. I take care of the people and their benefits and that piece. So I actually got some of this from her presentation, that 4 of the items that's under OPEB funds, retirement allowance, health insurance, health reimbursement accounts, and spouse health insurance. And so obviously that brings me to another aspect of our presentation, which is funded versus unfunded liabilities. Unfunded liabilities are debt obligations that do not have sufficient funds set aside to pay the debt. Prior to the establishment of the OPEB trust,
these type of funds were being paid as they came up. So there wasn't a particular fund out there to cover it. And that was one of the reasons why I created the OPEB fund, in which, as Ms. Spivey said earlier, it was initially invested with $3 million. And the purpose of that was for it to become a funded liability, and that you could get the benefit of it being invested into the market. And that's one of the main purposes of it. So you hear that term a lot when it comes to pensions in general, is whether it's a funded versus an unfunded liability.
Got a question on the healthcare, if you don't mind. Is the city, as part of the retirement program, the city pays healthcare premiums for each retiree? Is it?
Yes, for our for our pre-65 employees, we do offer health insurance for them. Specifically for their medical health insurance, the city does make a contribution towards that cost.
Toward the cost, doesn't pay the whole premium?
That is correct. No, we do not pay the whole cost.
So there's a set dollar amount that's allowed for each retiree prior to 65?
Based on their level of coverage, whether or not you choose, retiree only, retiring spouse, retiring children, or retiring and family coverage. There's actually, it's a fixed dollar, but we pretty much do it based upon a percentage split in that regard. So yes, we do actually assume some cost of the contribution for that, for the coverage.
What is that percentage split now?
Oh, Mr. Gardner, I would probably tell you it's probably about probably close to maybe about a 47-53% split. 53 being the city and 47 being the retiree.
So the next thing that I have on my slide, it comes from the Virginia Code. It deals with the investment of retirement systems. Retirement funds which are available and not necessary for immediate payment of pension or benefits shall be invested with the care, skill, prudence, and diligence under the circumstances then prevailing that a prudent person in a like capacity would use. Investments shall be diversified so as to minimize the risk of large losses. The reason why I wanted to focus on one word, which is diversified, and the reason why I wanted to use that is we need to be conscientious of the fact that the funds need to be diversified. And I want to use the example of Boeing. Boeing, as a result of the second fatal crash in 5 months involving the Boeing 737 MAX jets, their value has dropped tremendously. They've been pretty much banned from flight, period. I mean, I think the United States and Canada was one of the last two countries to do so. And so not only the stock price of Boeing had taken a hit, but for instance, if you had a fund that was invested with, for instance, the Dow Jones, that tracked the Dow Jones Industrial Average, because Boeing is one of the 30 publicly traded companies that makes up the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it would be a significant hit because, that impacts that because only 30 companies.
Sure.
So that's the reason why the investment mix that we have is so important. And so all of our funds are not invested just in large publicly traded companies in the U.S. We have exposure globally, we have exposure in bonds, we have exposure in all these different things. And this particular statute codifies why and how that should be done. So the last thing I wanted to mention was we talked about this quite a bit, which is the pension obligation bonds. I just want to make sure the board is aware that the city issued $169.3 million in pension obligation bonds in 2013 to bring the funded status to 80%. And this is from the lows of 32% and 28%, respectively, in the Portsmouth Fire and Police and Supplemental Retirement Systems. So prior to that, that was what the funded status was of the system. And then we had the pension obligation bonds. So it's not only what the funded status is now, and I'll use, for example, the funded status of the Portsmouth Supplemental System in 2017 was 75.87%. And in 2018, it was 72.35%. But that is with the benefit of the pension obligation bond that we also are responsible for paying that too. We have to pay back that money that we borrowed. So that is something that I think the board should be mindful of as it relates to exercising its discretion with respect to the fund. And the last thing I wanted to mention was in June 28, 2016, the city commissioned the Davenport and Company to do a pension governance study. And so they created a actual booklet, and they had a list of suggestions that they had, one of which was to create a governance manual. And that was to codify all of the different things that we're doing, and for instance have like qualifications labeled for like the board itself as to what type of qualification you would want for the board to have. Another thing they talked about was the responsibilities, what responsibilities should be assigned to key staff personnel, so forth and so on. So I think that is something that the board should always keep in mind. And I know John Hancock had a slide that they would use to say that, these were the things that were done from that study. Mm-hmm. But obviously, if we're doing a conversation about governance, we actually commissioned that company to do that study. So I think, and I have a copy of it, so if anybody would like to have it, I can make a copy of it for anybody that would like to use it. But that pretty much concludes my study on corporate governance. Any questions?
Hey, Derek, regarding the OPEB that's been added to our portfolio, now we have the same fiduciary responsibilities for that as we do the existing supplemental retirement pension funds, correct?
We have a obligation, certainly. I would add, I don't think our obligation is as strong for that as it is for this, and the reason why, there is actually, we pooled our money into a larger, and they have their own separate.
Right, the VML system, yes.
They have their own separate board,
right,
and of which we have a right to participate.
Right.
And I believe that's something that the board has suggested, that we wanted to make sure we send a representative to the next meeting. So I think our obligation with that is obviously less and diminished because we only have a small component to play into that. Versus this is something that is our fund that we are solely responsible for. So I don't think it's even possible for us to be the same level of responsibility to that, since we're only a small portion of that. And one of the reasons why we established that particular OPEB trust fund was because they had a array of advisors that they had available because of the amount of money that was involved and the amount of other jurisdictions that are involved. I mean, there were probably 50 different municipalities that are involved in that particular group. So I don't think we have the same responsibilities at all.
I just want to make sure we fulfill that responsibility that we do have. Should we, number one, have our OPEB responsibility reflected in the bylaws and or the city statute for retirement? That's a question. Number two, if so, we need to get that done. But to document that we are doing the piece that we do hold, should we make sure, again, the bylaws, if nothing else, maybe need to ensure that we do appoint someone to be our representative to VML, and that they in fact come back and at some board meeting during the year they bring back the VML information so we can see that the actuarial study was done what it says. And I guess the other piece was regarding process. When do we expect to see payment information coming from that OPEB fund.
We can certainly look back at the requirement for that OPEB fund and look and see what modifications may need to be made to policies and bylaws. And we'll certainly make the inquiry with regard to what is coming out of that fund and what capacity that comes out. I'm presuming that's coming out of those meetings, but we will make the effort to get whatever information that's most recently been distributed and get that.
As an example, we know that $3 million went in there about a year ago. We know payments haven't come out yet from being on another OPEB board. I know they're getting ready to be making a payment. So, I don't want us to be surprised when money comes out and we don't know why or how or what the amounts were, or how it was calculated.
Certainly.
That's very valid.
We can certainly report back on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Mr. Challenger for this training he's offered, and I want to be mindful of your time. Madam Chair, I think we've got one thing in closed session, but I want, first, you seem to have that.
Yeah, I had one request, and I do want to thank Mr. Challenger. That was really worth our time.
Good job.
The public work session, I was going to ask if Misha could send us the link to that YouTube, send the board, so that we can especially look at the presentation that Andre made, the actuarial report. I think it would be beneficial to us. You referred to it, and it sounds like something we can sink our teeth into. Okay, thank you.
Could everyone come in?
Sure.
Michelle, would you also send them the slides too that go with it, just in case as they watch it, they want to jot down some notes?
All right, thank you. Mr. Ashford.
As to grab on to the end of Mr. Challenger's presentation, I said I would make you all aware of some of the subject matter that was covered in the National Association of Pension Attorneys conference. And so just as to give you some sense of what that conference entails, I asked you to take a look at page 4, some of the subject matters that were covered. Page 4, governance and fiduciary implications of delegation and the proper role of a board in these matters. Page 5, there was a discussion of fiduciary implications in investment negotiations and decision making. Page 6, on the benefit side, there was a discussion. It's called Show Me the Money, Preventing and Recouping Overpayments. These are all subject matters that we as staff cover in terms of the board, but this gives you a sense of what the discussion is nationally with regard to public pensions. Page 7, a discussion on applying your plan documents when a strict application may come to question. And then, of course, we have some text updates in terms of where the federal law addresses that matter. On page 9, there's a senior counsel section. And in the most recent meeting, we talked about risk insurance. That was a question that someone asked about indemnification of board members. And of course, addressing legal counsel and outside counsel were also issues. Mr. Challenger and I tend to attend these meetings. I know, I want to say a couple of years ago, the board approved a couple of $1,000s towards some of this training. And I will likely be coming back because it was sort of a one-shot deal. I may be coming back after discussion with the staff to see if we can codify $1,000 or $2,000 to have someone attend. There are 2 meetings, one in February and one in June. If we can get one of them covered by the board, then my regular budget will cover the other. Because we are trying to constantly, as you all are, trying to update and improve our processes. And as I told Mr. Challenger, there's so much information coming out of this meeting. We are trying to hit them consistently until we reach a level of comfort in terms of our resources and whatnot, that we think we can do it a little less frequently. But right now, we're trying to make sure we build in all those processes. And it's great information in terms of evaluating our fund versus all of the national funds statewide. Some are smaller than ours, some are the same size as ours, and of course, a bunch of them are much larger. New York personnel system, CalPERS, those sorts of systems.
Thank
If
you.
you have any questions, there are certainly other slides that go with this, but I wanted to give you a flavor of it as opposed to hitting you with 40 pages of PowerPoints on each subject matter, some of which will certainly go over your head. Madam Chair, I think we have the one matter for
Yes.
closed session.
I move to go into closed meeting as allowed by Virginia Code 2.23711 and 2.23712A pursuant to the applicable exemptions, Virginia Code subsection 2.23711A8 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel employed by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel and pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.23705.1 and 2.237A1 for discussion of personnel records containing information concerning identifiable individuals as it relates to eligibility for retirement benefits. I would request that someone adopt my motion.
So adopted?
Second.
Second.
And
Moved and properly second. We are now in closed session.
You need a vote.
Again, are we done?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I hereby move that each member certify that to the best of his or her knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
It needs to be adoption in a second.
Move the wait.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion's carried. We are now back in session, and if there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. And our next meeting is April the 11th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Good job. Jerry, good job on that. Great education.
Get together.